He is risen. He is risen indeed. I wish that we could be together for me to proclaim that and for you to respond that he is risen indeed. But happy Resurrection Sunday. Happy Easter. This has been a long week. Holy Week is always kind of a long, drawn-out week where we think about every step that Jesus took towards the cross. But it's also, that is compounded, that feeling of a long week. That's compounded because we're stuck in our homes. And I appreciate this opportunity to observe Holy Week in quarantine and isolation, because I really think it kind of forces us to face the reality of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. And for me, I can only speak for myself, it's been a transformative experience. I don't think that this whole ordeal will leave me unchanged. I've enjoyed following Holy Week during this time of quarantine. But the week's not over. Today's Easter, and I want us to think about Jesus' resurrection. And so if you would, turn to John chapter 20. John chapter 20. John 20, and we're going to read verses 1 through 18. And I want us to keep in mind some of the themes that we've been talking about. Things like disappointment and grief and sorrow, pain, and how Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection teaches us and equips us to deal with those things, those feelings, those realities in a Christ-like way. So let's read John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18. We're going to read through this, and I'm going to point things out as we focus on Jesus' resurrection. And so it says, now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb while it was still dark, and saw the stone already taken away from the tomb. So she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." So on the first day of the week, on Sunday, early in the morning, while it's still dark outside, Mary Magdalene shows her devotion to her Lord by coming to the tomb. Now John's account doesn't really tell us what she was doing there. And it's hard to know whether or not she expected the stone to be in place, blocking her entrance to the tomb, or if she expected the stone to be rolled away so that she could go in and maybe look after Jesus' body. We're not sure what her expectation was, but when she saw that the stone was rolled away, she automatically assumed that Jesus' body wasn't there. And so there's an assumption here. Mary makes an assumption that Jesus' body, but the assumption isn't that he is risen from the grave. The assumption isn't that Jesus has been resurrected and brought back to life. The assumption is much more in line with the disappointment that she and the other disciples have already faced. Her assumption is that somebody has stolen Jesus' body, and so it kind of adds to the disappointment that not only did the one who we thought would be the Messiah, not only was he handed over to the Romans by the Jewish religious authority, not only was he found guilty of the charges of blasphemy. Not only was he crucified in between two thieves, but his body now has been stolen. And so, talk about disappointment. Talk about just the depression that she must have felt. And so she tells Simon and John, Peter and John, they've taken Jesus' body out of the tomb, and we're not sure where they have placed him. Now, and so that's her assumption. I want us to think about her actual physical position, because this is going to really intertwine with one of the big themes that John is going to bring out here. But think about where Mary is physically located. It doesn't tell us that she went up to the tomb. It doesn't tell us that she went inside the tomb. But from a distance, she saw that the stone had been rolled away. And so there's this very real distance that Mary, at this point in her disappointment, is not willing to breach. She's not willing to get any closer to the tomb. From a distance, she makes an assumption, and she's comfortable with what she assumes. She is secure in thinking that is the reality. That they have taken Jesus and his body has been stolen. We don't know where he's at. And that's the truth. And from a distance, that's what I believe. But so I want us to recognize that she is outside of the tomb. She's far away from the place where Jesus' body had been. And she's at a distance. And because she's at a distance and she's made this assumption, she also maybe assumes that that's a safe place. That looking from afar, all of what I thought is true, and Jesus' body is gone. And so she doesn't get any closer to look at what's inside the tomb. She makes that assumption, and she is physically at a distance from the tomb itself. The question, though, is, should she stay far away? Should she make an assumption? Should she keep that distance and not get any closer to the tomb? And I think that what John, in his whole gospel, is trying to... One of the things that one of the pictures that he's painting for us, one of the invitations that he's making to us is, don't stay far away. Don't keep yourself at a distance from Jesus. Don't keep yourself at a distance from asking questions. Don't keep yourself at a distance from faith. I think John invites us from the very beginning of his gospel to come and see, to take a closer look, to look a little bit harder, to get a little bit closer, because you might be surprised. And in this occasion, Mary, dealing with her disappointment without getting a closer look, is a little bit dangerous. Because disappointment without a closer look can lead us to forget what God can do. Let me say that again. And I want you to think about the disappointment that you faced in your own life. Disappointment without a closer look can lead us to forget what God can do. And here's why I say that. Because recently in Mary's life, she heard about the reality that through Jesus, God raised Lazarus from the dead. And so she knows that resurrection is a possibility. She knows that Jesus has the power to bring others to life, and therefore she should know that God has the power to bring Jesus to life, and yet disappointment distorts this reality that she once knew. Had it slipped her mind that Jesus had, or that Lazarus had left a tomb empty not long before? Had she already forgotten Jesus' words, Lazarus, come out? And so why does her memory not recall the power of what God can do? And that's because if we don't take a closer look at our disappointment, and we don't go up to the tomb and get a closer look, we might be led to forget what God is capable of. And of course, disappointment and loss and grief can produce a shock that keeps us away from investigating the source of our disappointment. But Mary's not going to stay there, and that's the beauty of this. That's the beauty of this story. There is a progression, and even though she's in a place where she's not willing to go closer to the tomb, and she kind of stays in her place of disappointment, she's going to get there. She's going to arrive. She's going to take a closer look, and you'll be surprised at what she finds. Let's keep reading verses 3 through 10. It says, so Peter, remember she goes and she tells the disciples, so Peter and the other disciple went forth, and they were going to the tomb, and the two were running together. And the other disciple ran ahead faster than Peter and came to the tomb first. And so there's a foot race, kind of a 50-yard dash between the Apostle Peter and the Apostle John. And we can think of John as being younger, and so he's quicker than Peter. He has a little bit more stamina than the older Apostle Peter. So John gets there first, but watch what happens next. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. So John gets there first, and he kind of peeks inside, but he's not willing to go into the tomb. But watch what happens when Peter gets there. So he saw the linen wrappings lying there. He saw the face cloth which had been on his head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled. So Peter gets there. Peter goes straight in, is what it says. He came following him and entered the tomb, and that's where Peter saw the linen wrappings and the headcloth, basically the grave clothes that Jesus was wearing. But they were rolled up in a place by itself, and so they had been kind of folded and placed somewhere. And so the other disciple, who had first come to the tomb, then also entered. And so John gets there first. He won't go inside. Peter quickly arrives afterwards. Peter goes straight in and sees that Jesus' clothes that he had been wearing were placed neatly on the side. And then after that, John goes in and he sees what Peter saw. And it says that he saw and he believed. For as yet, they did not understand from the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. So the disciples went away again to their own homes. And so let's think once again. We thought about the fact that Mary's position keeps her at a distance from the tomb. Let's think about these two disciples' position in regards to the tomb and the place where they believed that Jesus would have been buried. John gets there first, but he stays on the brink. He stays at the doorstep. He's not quite inside. He looks closely inside, but he's not willing to go inside yet. What do you think kept him from going inside? Do you think it was maybe fear? If he goes inside, what will he see? What will he be faced with? What will he be confronted with? And I think we can relate to John. I know we can relate to Mary. We don't want to get close to our disappointment. We don't want to get close to the tomb, the place where hopes and dreams have have died and that's where we bury them, we don't want to get close to that. And so we make assumptions and we stay far away because there's some security in not having to get close. Or maybe like John, we're there and we're close, but we're afraid. And we don't really want to know what's happened. We're a little bit scared because it might be a reality that we're not ready for. But then there's Peter. And in classic Simon Peter style, he goes straight in. Peter's the one that gets out of the boat to walk on the water. Peter's the one that at the Transfiguration says, okay, let's set up some tents and make some booths. So, this is a good place for us to be. Peter is always willing to get close. He's always ready to get face to face. And so he goes straight into the tomb. And so he's enveloped by the reality that Jesus isn't there. And not only that, the grave clothes are there, but they've been folded and they're neatly placed there. Peter gets up close and personal with the reality of death, and yet the one who's died is not present. Now, Mary has told them Jesus' body has been stolen. She's sure of it. She's pretty sure that that's what happened. Somebody took Jesus' body away. And so Peter looks inside, but what he sees is a scene that doesn't look like a typical grave robbery. This is different. If they had taken Jesus' body, they would not have taken the time to take off the linen wrappings, which would have been wound very tight on his body. It would have taken a while to take those off. If somebody had stolen Jesus' body, they wouldn't have taken the time to take off the face cloth that had been on Jesus' head. And they definitely would not have taken the time to fold them neatly and place them to the side. They would have just, even if they did take them off, they would have just left them there. And so something about this scene does not strike Peter and John as being a grave robbery. This has divine fingerprints on it. They've seen some things that have at least got them thinking that, this doesn't seem like something normal. This has got to be supernatural. Something here is different. God's fingerprints are on this situation. And so it says that, at least about John, and we can assume Peter, that John saw and he believed. But the question is, what did he believe? And so they get up close and personal with death and disappointment and the depression that they've faced. And they're a little bit surprised because they don't find Jesus there, but they also don't find the scene of a grave robbery. And so they believe, but what is it that they believe? Sometimes when you get up close and personal with disappointment, it can lead you to faith. But faith in what? What is it that they believed? Well, it says that they still didn't understand from the scripture that he had been raised from the dead. And so they believed at this point that Jesus had been raised from the dead, but they weren't sure why he had been raised from the dead. Scripturally, they hadn't made the connection yet, but they believed that he was alive. They believed that he had been resurrected. A resurrection had taken place, but they weren't sure why. Because this doesn't fit in with their conception and their assumption of what the Messiah would do or what he would look like. This wasn't supposed to happen according to their narrative. But they believe that Jesus, whoever he is, has been raised from the dead. Because his body obviously hasn't been stolen. And so they go back to where they were staying. Do you think hope began to spring forth? Do you think faith led to a little bit of joy, a little bit of hope, but also maybe mixed in and intermingled with a little bit of fear and confusion? What is going on here? But we do see how the willingness to get closer and to investigate and get a closer look can lead you out of a place of doubt and into a place of faith. There's some value in the willingness to go into the tomb and to confront the things that are a little bit uncomfortable to deal with. And so, what about you and I? Where are we at? What is our position? Are we standing at a safe distance, making assumptions? Or are we getting closer, willing to maybe come face to face with some things that we're not sure about? Or like Peter, are we ready and willing to get into the tomb, into the place where our hopes and dreams have died, and say, okay, God, what is going on here? What are you doing? What have you done in this situation that can lead me to believe that something better is in store? And so, two questions. What do you see when you look at disappointment? And what do you believe when you see it? All three of the people that we've talked about, both Mary and John and Peter, had to ask themselves, what is it that I see and what do I believe? What do I see and what do I believe? And I think that there's a lot of places in our lives that are similar to the tomb. They are places where we have buried our hopes and our dreams, where we have buried relationships that didn't work out, where we have buried desires that were left unfulfilled, and we have put them to rest, and we've buried them, and we don't really want to get close to them because it didn't work out the way that we thought it would or the way that we wanted it to. And yet God makes the invitation to get closer, to take a second look, to go up to the tomb, to go into that place and ask yourself, what do I see and what do I believe, and do I think that God can work here? Do I think that a resurrection could happen? Do I think that God can do something supernatural that exceeds my expectations? But rarely do we dare to go inside that place because it's scary, because we are afraid, because the assumptions seem valid, because reason leads us to believe that if something has failed and something has died and something didn't work, we need to just leave it alone. But if we did go into that place, if we were like Peter and just went into the tomb, what would we see and what would we believe? Let's keep reading. Verses 11 through 18. Mary was standing outside the tomb, and so she's still there. The other disciples leave, but Mary lingers, standing outside the tomb, weeping. And so as she wept, she stooped and looked into the tomb. And so Mary has gone through some stages of grief here, and it seems like she's willing now to get closer and to look into the tomb. And she does. She looks inside. And she saw two angels in white sitting, one at the head and one at the feet, where the body of Jesus had been lying. And so now those assumptions maybe are starting to dissolve. Well, there's angels here, so I guess Jesus' body wasn't stolen, right? Not yet. She holds on to the assumptions. She clings to what she thinks has happened and what she thinks is reality. The angels say to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she said to them, "Because they have taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they have laid him." And so even face to face with angels, Mary is still holding on to what she thinks is what has happened. They've stolen Jesus' body. Don't you see? He's not here, and I don't know where he is. When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, and did not know that it was Jesus. I have to stop and I have to say, if you are willing to get face to face with disappointment, if you're willing to go into the tomb where your desires and your hopes and your dreams and every expectation that has been unfulfilled, and in the places in life where you haven't been satisfied, if you're willing to go into that place, and look and investigate, you might see Jesus. You might come face to face with the risen Lord. You might see something that you were not expecting, that you didn't assume you would see. And Mary here comes face to face with the risen Lord Jesus. And Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Why are you sad? Why are you distraught? Why are you in shock? Why are you depressed?" And he asks her the question, who are you seeking? Who are you looking for? And I think that's a great question. May we always, even in our disappointment, even in our despair, even in our times of joy and happiness, may we always be looking for Jesus, always be willing to pursue Christ. Whether things are going good or whether things are going bad. May we always be able to answer, who are you looking for? I'm looking for Jesus. Supposing him to be the gardener. Wait, what? Mary still doesn't know that this is Jesus. She thinks that Jesus is the gardener. Wait a second. Why would a gardener be at the tomb? And there's a really hopeful, joyful explanation for why Mary thinks that there could be a gardener there. And that's because this tomb, this place of death, this place of despair, this place of depression and darkness, this tomb is actually in the middle of a beautiful, lush garden. That's right. Sometimes we forget that Jesus was buried in the tomb, but the tomb was in a garden. And she says to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Sometimes we want to do with Jesus what we think is the best. Mary says, I'll take Jesus' body. I'll do what I think needs to be done. I'll take care of Jesus' body. But in that very moment, Jesus said to her, "Mary, Mary, Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Isn't it interesting how immediately when she heard her name, Jesus, she knew that it was Jesus. And Jesus says something to the effect earlier on in the Gospels, I know my sheep and my sheep know me. And Jesus knows our name. And when Jesus calls out Mary's name, she knows immediately, that's Jesus. That's not the gardener. That's Christ. And sometimes maybe all we need is to be able to hear Christ saying our name in that place of disappointment, to realize Jesus can be here. Something different has taken place, something that I wasn't expecting, but something beautiful. Maybe I can see Jesus in the place of disappointment. And Jesus said to her, "Stop clinging to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brethren and say to them, I ascend to my Father and your Father, and my God and your God." So Mary Magdalene came, announcing to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord. I've seen the Lord." And that he had said these things to her. And so this theme that the Apostle John draws out in his story of Jesus is the invitation to come and see. It's an invitation to move in closer, to look harder. And sometimes to look harder at the darkness. Look harder at the disappointment in your life. Look closer at the depression. Look deeper into the pain that you feel. Because you might see something you weren't expecting. But first you have to be willing. You have to be willing to approach the tomb. You have to be willing to peek your head inside. You have to be willing to get a closer look. And so maybe God is telling you to be willing, to let go of your assumptions, to go unguarded into the place where you haven't dared to go before because it's too painful, it's too depressing, it's too disappointing. And God's telling you, just nudging you, just go inside. Take a closer look. And so, what does Mary now see? Well, she sees Jesus. She sees Jesus. She realizes that she's in a garden where the tomb is. But the person that she sees is not the gardener, it's Jesus. It's Christ. And so, the tomb was temporary. The tomb was just a temporary place. But the garden, now she's not even thinking in terms of being near the tomb. She's thinking in terms of being in the garden. And she's with Jesus. And that's the bigger reality. That's the bigger reality. There might be a tomb in your life where there are painful things. But Jesus is there. And that tomb is actually in a garden. And he's saying, look around. Look at me and look around. God can do something greater. God can bring good from your place of pain. God can do something supernatural in your place of difficulty. And so she's surprised to see the risen Lord, but she knows that it's him. And so let's go away from Easter this year thinking and knowing that if you look into your pain, you might see Jesus. If you look into your suffering, you might find him. If you look into your disappointment, he might appear to you there, calling your name, pointing you to a greater reality. Not a reality of disappointment, not a reality of death, not a reality of depression, the reality of life and life in abundance. The reality that God works all things out for the good of those who love him. Are you willing to see that reality? We see it here. We see it here. Do we see it here? Do we see it here? Do we see it here? And so the encouragement this Resurrection Sunday is to move in closer. Take a closer look. Gain a deeper insight. Be willing to plumb the depths of your disappointment. And you might be surprised. You might see Jesus. You might experience life out of death. You might experience joy from a place of disappointment. Blessings.